Jordan, you just got done with a panel that ACLJ Action was leading on lawfare. And it had Rick Grinnell, our colleague, and you talked about all things lawfare. Give us a sense of what you guys discussed and how it was received in that room in Milwaukee.
Sure, and that was the Kansas GOP that sponsored that event, and they've been our client before, Will, and for our audience to know, of course, in that 14th Amendment case, they were critical in putting together that multi-state challenge to the attempt to remove President Trump from the ballot, from the primary ballot. I think there's been so many issues, of course, what happened over the weekend. We can almost forget where the issue of lawfare has taken us. But the reality, and again, we're fighters here at the ACLJ, so it's not to just be negative, but we saw the final outcome of full-on lawfare and demonization of your political opponent when you criminalize someone for being, supporting a Make America Great Again agenda, and you want to put them in jail, or you want to bankrupt them, or you want to seize their buildings. Well, you encourage crazy people to take potentially violent action against them, thinking that they're doing something like preventing the next Hitler. I mean, we've heard that kind of rhetoric used about President Trump. And so, again, when you sent me that DNC email, again, the fact that they're going right back to extremist, that's just one step away from saying, white supremacist or evil or wrong. I don't think the left is going to be able to hold their tongue on JD Vance or Donald Trump for very long. I think there is the news story about, again, the law enforcement failures, the Secret Service failures, that's a real story in Washington, D.C. I thought Rick Grinnell said something very interesting, though, today in our panel. Will, he said, we don't need a 6-month-long congressional investigation to ask why there was no Secret Service on the top of a building 100 yards away from where the former president of the United States was speaking. That should not take members of Congress having to subpoena people. That should be one question to the head of the Secret Service. And now it looks like they're trying to put blame on local law enforcement, whereas we've seen in these other shooting attacks inside the United States that oftentimes they are not equipped or ready to deal with active shooter situations. And so in this matter, though, you had Secret Service with time to prepare, time to advance. There's a lot of talk still about that. Of course, people saw the bandage last night. I think just seeing President Trump and that bandage on his ear is a reminder to the entire country of what he went through 48 hours ago. And I think, again, talking about Senator Vance, his background, I think we'll have time. He'll address the whole convention in a couple days, and that'll be when we hear a little bit more about his story. But right now, Will, what is dominating this convention is obviously one, not being afraid to get out there, get our message out, and to take a stand against this demonization for our politics.
Well, Jordan, I want to play this clip for you because we're going to talk a little bit about the congressional investigation in the next segment. We'll bring Harry Hutchison on to talk about the letters that have gone out from Congressman Comer, Chairman Comer, to the Secret Service. But I wanted to play this because you said, I don't think the left can hold back too long on their demonization. And this happened this morning while you were preparing and delivering a panel on lawfare and brought up the demonization issue. But this is from Senator Chris Murphy, a colleague of JD Vance in the United States Senate. And this is how he characterized, it's a little bit long, but I think it's important to play the whole thing, the pick of JD Vance and what a Trump-Vance campaign and an administration would look like. Let's go ahead and play bite 8.
There is a very mainstream element of the Republican Party and Trump's infrastructure that is very thoughtful about how they are going to end Democratic norms. JD Vance is part of that infrastructure, right? He has been fairly public in his antipathy for democracy. There is just a dominant strain in the Republican Party and some of the sort of thin intellectual veneer that covers Trumpism that JD Vance is a big part of, that simply believes that democracy is antiquated, that it doesn't work any longer, that we would be better off if we just had one person in charge and the rest of us were stripped of our rights, and that we put men back in charge, that we created this nation in a new cloak of Christian nationalism. That's where JD Vance comes from. And he talks a good game, but if you really listen to him, he is being picked in part because he is going to help shape this transition away from democratic norms, this transition to a white patriarchal Christian-dominated nation, something that's very different, right, than the nation that many of us have thought we have been a part of this many years.
Jordan, Senator Murphy is using a little bit bigger terms than the left is used to using, but it's all the same red meat to the left that got us to where we're at.
Yeah, the idea that they want to get rid of our democratic norms in our country. This is someone who was an Iraq war veteran, served his country, is the first millennial to be nominated to serve in an executive branch at this level. Served his country, then attended Yale Law School, wrote a book that was loved by people on both sides of the aisle. I don't think it was political at the time at all. Has been outspoken early on about his views about President Trump. Early on, he's someone who switched, that was concerned about some of the rhetoric himself, in the early days of President Trump. Then got to know him, and then got to see the work that was done and the issues. But you see what Senator Murphy said. If you happen to be someone, even if you went to Yale Law School, even if you're someone who should be on their side of the aisle, and you happen to realize, hey, you know what, this Make America Great Again message resonates with people because it works and because it's the right way to fight in Washington, you are an enemy of democracy. What is worse? That's dictators. Dictators, I guess, are worse. But I mean, most dictators around the world are enemies of the United States. Certainly, when we start calling people enemies of democracy, that's the kind of language you would reserve for the Ayatollah or for Vladimir Putin, maybe. Not for a Republican-nominated vice presidential candidate and U.S. senator from Ohio.
Jordan, the moment that the Truth Social announcement of JD Vance went out, I got a push notification from Vox, which, the storied conservative publication that Vox is. I'm kidding. But its headline was that Trump's VP pick is a naked authoritarian. They had it ready to go to call him an authoritarian. In the climate we're in, they went there immediately.
Yeah, this authoritarian line, what are they talking about? I mean, you realize they're just throwing this stuff out because he's now associated with President Trump? This was someone who wasn't afraid to go on mainstream networks and defend conservatism or defend the Republican Party, fight back against the weaponization of our legal system, like we talked about today with the Kansas GOP, which people are really concerned about because of where those outcomes go when you criminalize your political beliefs in America, and the idea that everyone now is thinking. I mean, the amount of security changes you could imagine that have gone on just in the last every day here has changed because of what happened on Saturday. But what's amazing about our country is that happened on Saturday and that we're all here, and we nominated chosen by President Trump, nominated a vice president at this convention. And again, people are going to learn more and more about, JD Vance. He was a name known because of the book. He is a name known because of course, his time in the U.S. Senate. And because I think he kind of scares the left because one, this is likely, especially if they are to win, is someone who is set up to run for potentially president in 4 years. I mean, think about that. To have a president who is a millennial and is someone who is able to reach across, winning in Ohio, winning in the states that matter, and is able to take the same message that isn't afraid to, and went to the same schools they did. And they that always, just upsets them the most. How can this Yale law graduate really take these views unless he's some kind of evil dictator? That must be the only way. He's an authoritarian. Like you said, you use these words, and crazy people do what they did on Saturday. If you use these words to describe mainstream political actors in our country. And I don't think you can get any more mainstream than being a nominee on the Republican Party or a nominee on the Democrat Party, one of the two political biggest parties in our country in our lifetimes.
Folks, we are at a pivotal moment in the history of this country, and the ACLJ is redoubling our efforts to defend your life and liberty. And that's why we launched our Life and Liberty Drive, where your gifts to the ACLJ are doubled. Go to aclj.org. This morning, as we said, Jordan was giving a panel with Rick Rennell and Ben Cisney on lawfare, educating the conservative movement on the dangers of lawfare and how we at the ACLJ push back. And that's what you, when you give to the ACLJ, are supporting our efforts in pushing back against the lawfare of the left, as well as educating the conservative movement about how they can get involved. Go to aclj.org and have your gift doubled today.